Isaiah Foster didn't think twice, he just ran into the flames. The old apartment building was already choking on smoke when he pushed through the front doors, coughing hard, his arms shielding his face. He didn't have time to think about what he was doing. All he knew was that someone had screamed for help from the third floor, and the firefighters hadn't gotten there yet. And if there was a chance someone was still inside, he couldn't just stand there and watch. He had too much to lose. His 6-year-old daughter Valerie was waiting in his rusty pickup truck across the street, wrapped in a blanket, watched over by their neighbor Mrs. Collins, who had rushed out half-dressed when the fire broke out. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was just bringing Valerie back from her piano lesson when the building next to the convenience store exploded into panic and smoke. "Third floor," someone shouted. "There's still a woman up there." He didn't even ask questions. Years of working construction had made Isaiah strong, but it was fatherhood that made him fearless. By the time he reached the third floor, the ceiling was groaning. The heat was unbearable. He kicked open a door and found her curled on the floor in a fitted navy suit, coughing hard, face streaked with ash. Her heels were off, and she looked like she couldn't stand. She was trying to crawl, gasping. "I've got you," he said, scooping her up without hesitation. She clung to him, weak and dazed. "I can't see." "You don't have to, just hold on." The hallway collapsed behind them as he ran. When they burst out of the building, the crowd shouted. Firefighters rushed in behind him, but Isaiah didn't stop until he'd gotten her across the street, laid her down near the ambulance, and checked that she was still breathing. She blinked up at him, trying to focus. Her lips parted to speak, but nothing came out. Isaiah brushed a hand over her forehead. "You're okay now," he said, his voice rough. "You're safe." Then he remembered Valerie. He turned, sprinting back to the truck, his heart pounding until he saw her safe in the front seat, hugging her stuffed giraffe. "Daddy," she cried, and he scooped her up, holding her tight. "I'm okay, baby. I'm okay." 3 days later, Isaiah was back at the construction site. The job paid just enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. He did all right most days, but it wasn't easy being a single dad. Valerie's mom had walked out when she was 2, and he hadn't heard from her since. He didn't have time for dating or drama. His world was his daughter. "Hey, hero," one of the guys shouted across the site, tossing him a water bottle. "You see the news? They're calling you the fireman without a badge, that woman you saved. Word is she's some big-time executive." Isaiah frowned. "She okay?" "Yeah, in the hospital but stable." He nodded once and got back to work. Harper Bellamy didn't remember everything about the fire, but she remembered him. The man's arms had felt like steel. His voice had been steady when the world was falling apart. And the way he'd looked at her concerned, not curious like he actually cared if she lived or died. She hadn't told anyone yet, but she was the CEO of Bellamy & Co., a luxury real estate firm that owned everything from skyscrapers to resorts. Her driver had taken a wrong turn that night, and she'd gone inside the corner building to look for a friend who lived there before the fire erupted. Now she sat in her private hospital room, scrolling through news headlines, trying to find him. When she saw a blurry photo someone took of him carrying her out, her chest tightened. There was something about the way he moved, purposeful, fierce. "I need to find him," she muttered. "Find who?" her assistant Callie asked, bringing her a fresh smoothie. Harper stared at the screen. "The man who saved my life." Isaiah didn't expect to see her again. He was picking Valerie up from her after-school program when a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. A woman stepped out, and for a second he didn't recognize her. Gone was the soot and ash. Now she wore a white blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans, her long brown hair falling in soft waves. She looked put together, elegant, untouchable. But when she saw him, her expression softened. It's you, she said. Isaiah blinked. You're okay. I am, thanks to you. She stepped closer. I've been trying to find you. He glanced down at Valerie, who was holding his hand tightly. This is my daughter, Valerie. Harper crouched to her level and smiled. Hi, Valerie. Valerie looked shy but curious. You're the lady from the fire. Harper laughed softly. I guess I am. Isaiah shifted. Look, I'm glad you're okay, but you didn't have to come all the way here. I wanted to, she cut in, to thank you properly. You already did. No, I didn't. She hesitated, then added, will you let me take you both to dinner, my treat? Isaiah looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. That's not necessary. It is to me. Valerie tugged on his hand. Can we, Daddy, please? He hesitated, then sighed. All right, just dinner. Dinner was not what he expected. Instead of a local diner, Harper took them to a rooftop restaurant downtown with string lights, live music, and a view of the skyline. Valerie's eyes lit up at the sparkling lemonade and fancy dessert. Isaiah felt out of place in his button-down shirt, but Harper made him feel like he belonged. She asked about his work, his daughter, and listened like she actually cared. You're good with her, she said softly. She's everything to me. And you're raising her on your own. He nodded. Harper looked at him, her eyes warm. You're incredible, you know that. He shook his head. I'm just doing what any decent man would do. No, she said, most wouldn't have run into a burning building. Her hand brushed his across the table, and Isaiah's heart skipped. He cleared his throat. So, what do you do? She hesitated, then smiled. I run a real estate company. That's so, like sales. Something like that. He had no idea she owned half the skyline. That night, as he tucked Valerie into bed, she whispered, I like her. Who? He asked, brushing her hair back. The fire lady. She smiled at you a lot. Isaiah chuckled. Yeah, well, she's nice, but people like her don't usually stick around. Valerie blinked up at him. Why not? He didn't have a good answer. But neither of them knew just how wrong he was. Isaiah had never stood in front of revolving glass doors before, let alone been invited past them. But now he was holding Valerie's hand outside a massive building on 5th and Belair, its silver nameplate catching the morning sun, Bellamy & Co. We're early, he said, glancing at the clock above the entrance. Valerie leaned against his leg, backpack slung over one shoulder. Can we go in now? He hesitated, then nodded. Just to the lobby, don't touch anything. The security guard inside gave them a polite nod as they stepped into the marble-floored atrium. The place felt like a cathedral made of money gold-veined columns, modern art installations, and a front desk that looked more like a sculpture than a piece of furniture. Isaiah had barely walked up to the reception counter when he heard heels clicking rapidly from the hallway behind it. Isaiah, Harper said, appearing in a navy sheath dress that somehow made her look even taller than he remembered. Valerie, you made it. We said we would, he replied, adjusting his grip on Valerie's hand. She crouched, her expression lighting up. I have something special planned for you. For me? Valerie asked, her eyes wide. Come on, Harper said, rising. I'll show you. They followed her into a private elevator, and Isaiah's stomach tightened as they ascended. He wasn't used to being anywhere with velvet walls and polished brass buttons. Harper had invited them to her office under the guise of showing Valerie how buildings were designed, saying she had a little surprise for her afterward. Isaiah hadn't known exactly what to expect, but this already felt like more than he'd signed up for. The elevator opened into a sunlit space that looked more like a luxury penthouse than a workplace. Floor to ceiling, windows revealed the skyline, and an indoor tree stretched toward the ceiling like it belonged in a greenhouse. "Is this where you work?" Valerie breathed. Harper smiled. "It is." Isaiah took a slow breath. "This doesn't look like any office I've ever seen." She turned toward him, brushing a hand through her hair. "I wanted you both to see my world." He crossed his arms. "Why?" She held his gaze. "Because you brought me back to mine." Before he could respond, a young woman appeared from the hallway, holding a clipboard and a small wrapped box. "This is for you," Harper said, handing the box to Valerie. Valerie unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a miniature architectural model of a treehouse, complete with solar panels and rope ladders. Her jaw dropped. "I designed it with you in mind," Harper said. "I had my team make it after you mentioned you liked climbing trees." Isaiah blinked. "You remembered that?" She looked at him, her tone gentle. "Of course it did." Valerie threw her arms around Harper's waist. "Thank you." Harper hugged her back, then turned to Isaiah. "Can I steal you for a moment? Just the two of us." He hesitated. "If someone watches her." "She'll be with Miriam. She runs our youth design program. Valerie's in good hands." Isaiah followed Harper into a glass-walled office overlooking the city. She gestured for him to sit, then took the seat across from him. "I know this is all a lot," she said. He leaned forward. "Harper, I don't want to be rude, but I'm not sure what this is." Her expression grew serious. "I wanted to thank you differently this time, not with a dinner or a gift, with a chance." "A chance for what?" She tapped her fingers together, thoughtful. "I read your file. Not your personal life, I wouldn't do that, just your professional record. You've been working construction for over a decade, but you've got certifications most guys don't. You've run sites, managed teams, that takes more than muscle." He narrowed his eyes. "How do you know all that?" "I asked the foreman you work under. He said you're the best he's had in years." Isaiah shifted. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to offer you something, a real job, here." He stared at her. "Doing what?" "Project oversight. We're acquiring a new development in Brooklyn. It needs someone who understands both the build and the people behind it. Most of our execs can't tell a nail gun from a glue stick." He gave a short laugh. "I don't belong in a place like this." "You do, you just don't believe it yet." He stood, pacing to the window. "This isn't my world. I fix things with my hands. I don't wear suits or sit in offices." "You wouldn't have to. It's field work. You'd be in charge of site operations. Full benefits, steady salary." He turned slowly. "Why are you doing this?" She rose too, walking toward him. "Because you gave me a second chance at life. This is me offering you one in return." He exhaled, looking out at the skyline. "I need to think about it." "Of course," she said softly. "Take all the time you need." On the ride home, Isaiah kept glancing at Valerie in the rearview mirror. She was humming to herself, holding the treehouse model carefully in her lap. "Did you like today?" he asked. "It was like being inside a cloud," she said. He smiled faintly. "Would you want me to work there?" She looked up. "Do they have lunch breaks?" "Yeah." "Then yes." That night, Isaiah sat on the porch after putting her to bed. The stars were faint over the city, but he could see a few. He thought about everything Harper had said. About the way she'd looked at him not like a project or a charity case, but like a man she trusted. He wasn't afraid of hard work, but this wasn't about swinging a hammer. It was about stepping into something bigger than he'd ever imagined. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about the job at all. Maybe it was about her. 2 weeks passed before Isaiah stepped into the Bellamy & Co. development site as its new project operations lead. He hadn't accepted the offer immediately. It took nights of staring at the ceiling, long talks with Valerie's after-school coordinator about adjusting schedules, and a quiet visit to his old foreman to say goodbye. But eventually, he'd walked into Harper's office, shook her hand firmly, and said, "Let's do it." Now he stood on a scaffold overlooking the early framework of what would become a luxury residential tower in Brooklyn's waterfront district. The site buzzed with activity cranes moving steel columns, workers shouting measurements, dust clinging to the morning air. It was familiar chaos, but now it was his to manage. He adjusted the strap on his hard hat and walked the perimeter, clipboard in hand. The crew responded quickly to his direction, not just because of his title, though that helped, but because they could tell he knew what he was doing. He didn't bark orders. He worked beside them when necessary, and when he paused to check a misaligned beam, he did it with the same precision he'd used when repairing Valerie's leaky faucet last winter. Quiet, focused, methodical. Later that afternoon, Harper arrived on site. She wore boots this time, not designer, but solid black work boots and dark jeans with a tucked-in Oxford shirt. Her hair was tied back, and Isaiah noticed she'd left the jewelry behind. She looked more like a field consultant than the woman who had once walked him into a rooftop restaurant. "You clean up well," she said, stepping around a pile of rebar. "I don't remember ever being dirty," he replied without looking up from the blueprint he was checking. Her laugh was low and short, fair enough. He finally glanced at her. "You're not here for a photo op, are you?" "No," she said, watching the crew haul a panel into place. "I wanted to see it, what you're building." He tapped the blueprint. "Same thing your company's funding." "But you see more than that, don't you?" He considered her for a moment. "I see people who will live in these walls. Kids who will ride their bikes through that courtyard, single moms who will carry groceries up those stairs." She turned to look at him fully. "That's why I wanted you." "Careful," he said, raising an eyebrow. "That could be taken a few ways." She didn't blink. "I meant everyone." They were interrupted by a site engineer needing his review on a load-bearing adjustment. Harper stepped back, letting him take over. She watched as he discussed the issue, offered a solution, and walked the engineer through a safer alternative. There was a quiet confidence in the way he operated, not arrogant, just assured. When he returned, brushing dust from his forearm, she said, "You have a way of making this feel human." "I don't know how to do it any other way." She took a breath, then asked, "Do you ever think about what you want for yourself? Not just for Valerie, but you?" He didn't answer right away. "I used to, before everything changed." "And now?" He looked over the skyline. "Now, I want her to have the kind of future that doesn't require saving." Harper nodded, her voice softer. "And what about being a man who deserves more than just survival?" He met her eyes. "You think I haven't thought about that?" "I think you've convinced yourself it's out of reach." "You don't know what it's like," he said, sharper than he intended. "Worrying about bills, picking up extra weekend shifts because your kid needs a new backpack." "No, don't," she said, holding his gaze. "But I know what it's like to inherit a legacy you didn't ask for, to build an empire and realize it doesn't mean anything if you're alone in it." The wind kicked up dust between them. A crane groaned overhead. He didn't look away. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to be alone in it anymore." The words hung in the air, heavier than steel. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression shifting. "I have to go. Emergency board call." He nodded. "Do what you need to." As she turned to leave, she paused. "Dinner, my place, tomorrow." He hesitated, just a second too long. "There's a swing set on the terrace," she added, "and a fridge full of juice boxes." Valerie giggled when he told her. "You like her," she said, dangling her legs over the side of the couch. "She's just someone I work with," he replied, sorting laundry. "She's not just anything." He gave her a look. Since when did you become a relationship expert? She shrugged. Since I saw how you looked when she gave me that treehouse. The next evening, Isaiah stood in front of a glass building with 26 floors, holding Valerie's hand. A uniformed doorman ushered them into a private elevator, and Valerie pressed the button with a grin. Harper's penthouse opened onto a space that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But unlike the sterile perfection he expected, it was warm. A plush navy sofa, watercolor paintings, a huge kitchen island cluttered with ingredients, and on the terrace, a real swing set with a view of Manhattan. Valerie ran to it immediately. Harper stood barefoot in the kitchen, stirring something in a pan. Her hair was down, and she wore a simple gray sweater with sleeves pushed up. I never thought I'd see you without steel-toed boots, he said, stepping inside. I never thought I'd see you in a button-up, she replied, handing him a glass of wine. He looked around. This is a lot. It's just home. He glanced at the ceiling. Your ceilings are taller than my entire living room. She smiled. Don't let it intimidate you. I don't get intimidated, he said, taking a sip. Good, because I need your help. He raised an eyebrow. I burned the garlic bread, she admitted. He laughed, and it was the first time she saw his whole face light up. They ate on the terrace. Valerie told stories between bites of pasta, Harper listened like every word mattered, and Isaiah found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The way she leaned in during Valerie's stories, the way she laughed without holding back, the way her eyes kept drifting to him when she thought he wouldn't notice. After dessert, Valerie curled up on the giant sectional with a blanket Harper had pulled from a closet and fell asleep mid-movie. Isaiah stood beside the windows, looking out over the city. She's comfortable here, he said. I want her to be, Harper said, joining him. Their shoulders brushed. He looked at her. You're not what I expected. She tilted her head. What did you expect? Cold, polished, distant. And what do you see now? He paused. Someone who makes a skyscraper feel like a home. Her eyes softened. You still think people like me don't stick around? He didn't answer. She stepped closer. Let me prove you wrong. And when she reached up, fingers brushing his jaw, he didn't move away. He kissed her like he'd been waiting since that night in the fire. And she kissed him like she'd finally found the reason she survived it. Isaiah had never seen Valerie so still. She sat on the edge of the plush armchair in Harper's private office, legs swinging, her eyes trained on the massive aquarium built into the wall. A lionfish drifted lazily behind the glass, its fins like silk fans. Harper had invited them to stop by after school, just for an hour, but Isaiah could tell this wasn't just another visit. He stood beside the window, watching the slow shift of the late afternoon light across the skyline. Harper was pacing something she rarely did, her hands loosely clasped behind her back. I've been thinking about something, she said, finally stopping in front of him. And I didn't want to say it until I was absolutely sure. Isaiah crossed his arms. You look like you're about to pitch a merger. She almost laughed. It feels like one. He waited. I've been offered a long-term development contract in Vancouver, she said. Very high profile. It would mean relocating for at least a year. Isaiah's jaw tightened. You already accepted? No, because I don't want to go without you. He blinked. You want us to move? I want to build something real, she said. Not just with concrete and steel, with you, with Valerie, but I know what I'm asking. He took a breath. That's not a decision I can make in a day. I'm not asking you to. Valerie looked up from the fish tank. Where's Vancouver? Harper walked over and knelt beside her. It's a city with mountains and forests. You can see whales from the shore sometimes. Do they have schools? They do, good ones. And tree houses, if I have anything to say about it. Valerie turned to Isaiah. Would you come too? Isaiah crouched in front of her. That's something we'd have to think about together. That night, after Valerie was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee untouched in front of him. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking of the clock above the fridge. Harper had left him alone with his thoughts, which somehow made it harder. He wasn't afraid of change, not really. But his life had been built around stability scraping by, yes, but with a rhythm he understood. Vancouver meant letting go of everything familiar, but it also meant giving Valerie a future that didn't involve second-hand shoes and broken heaters. And Harper, she wasn't a fantasy anymore. She was a woman who'd taken root in their lives, who knew how to speak gently to a child and challenge a man without flinching. She didn't just fit into their world, she made it bigger. The next day, he met her at the Brooklyn site. She was kneeling beside a young architect, pointing out load distribution on a tablet, her hair pulled into a braid that trailed over her shoulder. When she saw Isaiah, she stood. I have an answer, he said before she could speak. Her expression didn't change. All right. I'm not following you to Vancouver. She nodded slowly. Okay. I'm going with you. Relief broke across her face like sunlight. You're sure? I am. He glanced at the half-framed windows behind them. I've built a lot of things, but never a life chose. She stepped closer, and this is one you're choosing. He nodded, for me and for her. Harper reached for his hand. Then let me show you what we can make together. The next 4 weeks moved quickly. Valerie's enrollment was transferred to a small school near Stanley Park. Harper coordinated the relocation through her company, arranging housing with enough space for Valerie's art supplies, a piano they could afford to rent now, and a balcony where Isaiah could build something with his own hands again. Their last night in New York, Harper hosted a quiet dinner in the penthouse, inviting only the crew from the Brooklyn site. They brought hard hats signed with farewell messages and a framed photo of the team in front of the partially finished tower. Isaiah stood beside Harper as Valerie dozed on the couch, curled beneath a throw she'd claimed as hers. You scared? Harper asked. I've lived through worse. She leaned into him. I meant about us. He looked down at her. You don't scare me. The flight to Vancouver was smooth. Valerie spent it pressing her face to the window, marveling at clouds she insisted looked like castles. Harper brought snacks and a guidebook with sticky notes on every page. Isaiah kept one hand on Valerie's shoulder the entire time. Their new home overlooked the harbor. The building was modern but warm, with wood trim and soft lighting. Harper had picked it for the view, but Isaiah loved it for the quiet. Weeks passed, then months. Isaiah found work with a partner firm of Bellamy & Co., managing a new urban eco-residential project. He brought Valerie to the site on weekends and taught her how to read blueprints. Harper surprised them with a backyard treehouse on her birthday built to scale, just like the model. One evening in spring, they stood on the deck watching the sun dip behind the mountains. Valerie was inside, writing a story for school. You ever think about what you would have done if we never crossed paths? Harper asked. He considered it. I'd probably still be patching drywall and eating dinner out of paper cartons. And now. He turned toward her. Now, have more than I ever thought I deserved. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Isaiah blinked. What is that? Open it. Inside was a key, not to the house, they already shared that. It's for the design studio I bought down the street, she said. It's yours, build what you want, when you want. No client deadlines, no corporate red tape. He stared at it. You bought me a building. She smiled. You once carried me out of one. Figured owed you. He laughed quietly, then pulled her close. You gave me a future. She kissed him, slow and certain. From the window, Valerie watched them, then turned back to her story and wrote the final line with a grin. And then the fire became the beginning. The sound of hammers and laughter filled the air as Isaiah stepped back from the nearly finished railing, wiping sweat from his brow with the inside of his wrist. The workshop was coming to life in ways he hadn't imagined back when Harper handed him the key. The open floor plan now held rows of polished wood tables, design sketches pinned on the walls, and a corner where Valerie had set up her invention station, complete with a small drafting table and colored markers in mason jars. Outside, the spring air smelled like pine and salt. The harbor glistened just beyond the trees. Harper stood by the wide double doors, her arms crossed loosely, watching him with a look that could strip the noise from the world. You're going to need a sign, she said, something bold. I was thinking Foster built, he replied, double-checking the alignment of the beams. Simple, clean. Powerful, she said, stepping inside, but it's missing something. He glanced over his shoulder. What? She walked until she was right beside him. Your name is on it, but so is your future. Might as well make that part just as clear. He tilted his head. You volunteering to co-sign? She raised a brow. With my handwriting, absolutely not, but I do have an idea. She pulled a folded linen napkin from her bag and unwrapped it. Inside lay a brass plate engraved with Foster and Bellamy Design Studio. Isaiah stared down at it. You want your name on the door. I want your name next to mine, she said, voice low, in every way. He set down the drill and took her hand, brushing his thumb across her palm. You sure you want to be tied to someone who builds things out of wood and steel instead of numbers and forecasts? She stepped closer, smile touching her mouth. I've built towers that scrape the clouds, but you built something stronger. Yeah. You built a life, one that's rooted in love. He leaned in and kissed her, slow and certain, like placing the final piece in a frame that had taken years to build. Later that week, Harper took a leave of absence from Bellamy & Co. For the first time since she was 22, she stepped away from the boardroom and into a slower rhythm. She'd spent so long chasing expansion and acquisition that she hadn't realized how much she'd missed the quiet moments, morning walks with Valerie to school, afternoons tagging along with Isaiah to the workshop, evenings when they cooked together without checking emails or reviewing contracts. She started painting again, not for Galler. One evening, as the wind carried the scent of lilacs across the backyard, Harper handed Isaiah a slim envelope. What's this? He asked, brushing sawdust from his shirt before taking it. An invitation. He opened it and found a cream card inside. No gold foil or embossed names, just a simple handwritten note. Dinner just us, one promise, one answer. He looked up, heart knocking against his ribs. Where? Follow the candles, she said, glancing toward the edge of the garden. As the sun dipped low, Isaiah followed a trail of soft flickering lights that wound beyond the trees. At the end of the path, a table waited beneath a canopy of string lights, nestled between a cluster of pine trees and the rocky shore. The setting sun turned the water into a sheet of molten gold. Harper stood there in a soft blue dress, hair loose, no shoes on the mossy ground. The kind of beautiful that could undo a man. He stepped into the clearing, clearing his throat. You didn't have to go all out. I wanted to, she said, lifting her eyes to his, because this isn't just a dinner. Isaiah stepped closer. What is it then? She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. You once gave me my life back, then you gave me purpose, and now you've given me a family. He stared at the pouch. Harper. I want to ask you something, but not with a ring. That can come later, not with promises written on paper, just this. She opened the pouch and pulled out a single, smooth stone with a heart carved into it. Will you choose to stay, to build this with me every day, not because of obligation, but because you want to? Isaiah took the stone, fingers curling around it like it was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. You think, haven't already chosen you. I want to hear you say it. He reached out, cupping her face. I love you, not because you saved me, not because you're some impossible woman who came into my life like lightning. I love you because you see me, all of me, and you never once asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am. She pressed her forehead to his, then stay. I'm not going anywhere. They kissed there, beneath the lights, while the tide whispered promises against the shore. A week later, the workshop held its soft launch. Valerie handed out miniature wooden keychains she'd made herself, each stamped with the initials F and B. The community came out in full force: local builders, designers, even a few of Harper's former corporate contacts curious to see what she'd traded skyscrapers for. By the end of the night, Foster and Bellamy Design Studio had its first 6 contracts. But more than that, Isaiah and Harper had found something rarer than success: peace. Months passed, then a year. One afternoon, while Valerie practiced scales on her second-hand upright piano, Harper sat on the back porch, sketching a new residential concept. Isaiah joined her, brushing flour from his hands. He'd taken up baking on weekends, a habit that surprised everyone except Valerie, who insisted he made the best cinnamon rolls in British Columbia. Harper leaned against him. You ever miss New York? Sometimes, he said, but not the skyline, just the beginning. I like our middle better. He kissed the top of her head. Wait until you see our ending. She chuckled, already planning that. Not planning, just building. He tapped her sketchpad, like everything else. Inside, Valerie played the final notes of her song, the music drifting out the window like a promise. And in that moment, with the sound of their daughter's laughter echoing through the trees and the woman he loved by his side, Isaiah knew they had built something stronger than any tower. They had built forever.